Yeah. All right. We'll read this scripture to begin with, Psalm 27 and verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? The theme for the Adelaide Kids Camp that's coming up next month is brave. That's it, just the word brave. But it's got a picture of presumably David, because we don't know how old he was, but there he's pictured as a child in his robes with his sling. So it made me think of a few Bible narratives that required bravery, and what example that we could that it sets for us. And I wanted to just have a quick look at each event and draw out a particular pivot point in that story. I'm not particularly pitching this towards the kids, but it is pretty simple and straightforward, so they can follow along if they like. All right, I'm going to go to Joshua. I did these in chronological order because I couldn't help myself. So I'll go to Joshua first. So this is the fall of Jericho. Now, a lot of these events we're familiar with, and each of the examples that I'll give you, you will most likely know what happened. So I'm not going to go through every detail. I just want to jump in at a few particular points. Just in Joshua chapter 6, in verse 16, this is right at the end of the march that they were commanded to do around the city, where they were mocked and scorned by the residents. And then they were commanded to do so quietly on the last day 7 times. And in verse 16, and it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city, and the city shall be accursed, even it, and all that are therein to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all that are in her house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. And just down in verse 20, so the people shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the shout of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, and every man straight before him, and they took the city. And in verse 23, and the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brethren and all that she had, and they brought out all her kindred and left them without the camp of Israel. Rahab and her family, at that moment when there was the culmination of this, in the eyes of most of the people, this spectacle, this army of weirdos that just kept walking around the walls every day. They're going, like, they're not attacking. I don't know what they're trying to achieve. When it happened, when the walls fell down, Rahab and her family, they had to be brave. They had to be brave in the face of this danger and this invasion that was going to occur, and believe that they would be saved. But that's not the point when she decided to be brave. And that's really what I want to focus in on, is when do we decide to be brave? And the title of my talk is Brave Decision. Oh, I didn't close my quotation. I better fix that. Sorry, that'll bother me all the time. Okay, chapter 2. So right back in chapter 2, the spies were sent in to spy, that's what they do, spy out Jericho, to find out about the city, to find out about the people and what they were up against. And we know that Rahab, she took these people in. And there's a point here where she'd taken them in, she hidden, people came and inquired and said, there was some guys hanging around here, where are they? Oh, they left, I don't know where they are. And she brought them back out when everyone had gone. And she says to them in verse 11, she was talking to them about, we've heard about you people, about what happened in Egypt, what's happened to the things that have happened on the other side of Jordan. And in verse 11, and as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. Now therefore I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I've showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, or a pledge of faithfulness, and that you will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren and my sisters and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And the men answered her, Our life for yours, if you utter not this our business. And it shall be, when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with thee. This is the moment that she decided to be brave, because she was effectively betraying her own people, but that's because she recognized God's authority and she yielded herself to it. She said, of all the things we've heard, I know that your God is the most powerful being in heaven and in earth, and I want to be a part of that. Whatever her life situation is, don't know. But she'd made a decision. She said, me and my family, if you're steamrolling through the countryside because your God said it's yours, I don't want to be in the way of that. I want to be with him. I want to be with your people. So I will help you out for the salvation of my family and to be a part of that power. So she humbled herself and trusted that God would deliver her. And that is the point where she decided to be brave. She said, pledge your faithfulness, that if I do what I say you will do, you do what you say you will do. And not only that, God honoured that, because the walls fell down flat, except for this one sliver of wall. Well, I don't know what it looked like, but she lived on the wall. That's where her house was. So, God specifically preserved Rahab, and she followed their instructions, and she was saved. So she made a brave decision to yield herself to God for her salvation, for the hope of her salvation. All right, we'll go to another one, David and Goliath, 1 Samuel. We've heard this example many times in the past. So I shouldn't really have to explain much about it. But we see the moment. It's the classic moment that's immediately censored for the younger children in their version of the Bible stories. But here in verse 48 of 1 Samuel 17, it's this classic example of bravery. The shepherd boy or teenager or however young he was, facing down the giant man of war. He wasn't a jellyfish. But in verse 48 it says, And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. And he chops off his head. So we see this moment where he requires bravery to charge at this Philistine. They're all yelling at each other across the valley, and then they go, right, it's time. And he just runs straight towards him. I'm not afraid. I'm going to take you down. And he approaches this man and he kills him. But as you know, that's not the moment when he decided to be brave. And it's back over in verse 33 when he's having an interview with King Saul, who says, you're not cut out for the job, and he says, I think I am. Verse 33, And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him and slew him. The servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. This is when he decided to be brave, that he was going to entrust the battle to God, because he said, I have experience of God protecting me and delivering me out of dangerous circumstances, and this man is no different. You're all afraid of him because he's the biggest and baddest one they've got, but to me, he's just another animal that the Lord will help me to put down, and I'm not afraid of that. And that's when he decided to be brave. He said that God is before me. God is going before me into this battle, and I will have the victory because it's in his hands. So what have I got to fear? I don't need to worry about it because I already know that God is going to sort it out. And that's the confidence that I have. So he didn't need to fear the situation because he'd already trusted the victory to God. Esther is another brave woman that we're going to look at next, and we'll go to Esther. Esther's quite a remarkable story. There's a lot in that, but there's obviously the key points that I want to grab about what happens here. In Esther chapter 4, there's a lot happening here, and basically at this point in time, some of the children of Israel are living under the rule of the Medes and Persians, and as circumstance arises, Esther is chosen to be queen, and it's more of a social status rather than a true power couple, but she finds herself in this position where a plot has occurred in the background because of a man's hatred towards her uncle, Mordecai. And there's an opportunity for her to try and bring that to the king's attention, but there's risk involved. And in verse 11 of chapter 4, she's having a very disjointed conversation because she's getting someone to relay the messages back and forth. But she's having this conversation with Mordecai. And in verse 11, she reminds them that all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. So while this has been happening, she hasn't had an opportunity to go and see the king, her husband, who that she's supposed to be married to, because it was a different situation there. You know, the Medes and Persians, they held power. The king was the ultimate authority, and they had the rule over this people. And, you know, Esther was more of as I mentioned, just a social figure for the king. And she said, I haven't been able to see him, to talk to him. He hasn't summoned me into his court or anything like that. So I haven't been able to broach the situation. If I go into the king, I could die under their law, because they are the ones who have authority over us. And if I go in and he doesn't favor me, my life is forfeit. I could be put to death. And so in chapter 5, verse 1, now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house, just so you know where it is. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then the king said unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom. This is the point where she needed bravery, where she knew there was a risk of her life being forfeit, but she stepped into the king's court because she needed to create an opportunity to bring to his attention what was going on, that Haman had created this plot to kill her people. The king didn't actually know that she was of Israel descent. And, it eventuated that she was able to set up this dinner party, which didn't end well for Haman, where she, points him out and reveals what's going on, because the king had favor with Esther. He said, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. I'll give you even half the kingdom if you want. And so when it was revealed that there was a plot against her life, he was very, very upset about what Haman had done. But at this moment, she needed bravery to go, I have to take the risk for this opportunity to eventuate. But that wasn't the point where she decided to be brave. It was back over in chapter 4 and verse 13. And we get a very classic line out of this. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there an enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. That's the moment where she decided to be brave. She said, I'm going to have a prayer and fast, and I want you to all fast for me as well, because I'm going to take this opportunity that presents itself to save others, even if it's at risk of my own life. She accepted her place in that opportunity, and she decided to let the Lord be the one who decided the outcome. If I perish, I perish. Now that's a very, very brave thing to do, to say, regardless of what's going to happen, Lord, I trust my life to you. And whichever way it unfolds, I want you to be the author of that. So that was the point where she made the decision to be brave. So whatever was going to happen when she walked into the king's court, she was already sorted. She already knew whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and I'll praise the Lord for whatever turns out. And as we know, God let the circumstance unfold in her favor to preserve her people, and it was a wonderful victory that came out of that. We're going to go and have a look at Daniel. This is the one where the idea sparked from, and then the other examples came into fitting into this theme. Daniel chapter 6 and verse 16. Now this is post King Nebuchadnezzar. It's when the Medes and Persians had taken power, and we have here we go, Darius. King Darius is in control of Babylon, but Daniel had been revealed as one who was wise, as under the previous king, and people said, "Oh, you should check in with this guy. He knows his stuff," and so he earned favor again with King Darius, ruler of the Medes and Persians, and the other advisors became very jealous about him, and they created this plot to trap him, and the king his hand was forced to fulfill the law that he had written. And in verse 16 of chapter 6, then the king commanded that they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. And a stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. So what had happened was that Daniel had been caught out in this trap that the other lords, the other advisors had set for him, and the king was very distressed by it. But he couldn't change it because he'd written it and sealed it with his royal insignia and the signet, that it was the law, and he was not allowed to change that. And so he had to go through with it. But he feared for Daniel's life, and he wanted Daniel to live. He wanted him to get through this. And, he says to him in verse 16, "Thy God whom thou servest, he will deliver you." And he stays up all night and he can't sleep. He's worried about everything that's going to happen. And in verse 20, "And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God." Daniel would have required a lot of bravery at that point where they threw him into the den. And he went to meet this fate of, presumably certain death, because that was what the den of lions was for, was to throw your enemies in there, and then they could, the lions would sort them out for you. Daniel needed to be brave that God was going to preserve him and deliver him through the situation. And even the king was trying to be brave for Daniel. But that wasn't the point when he decided to be brave. That's in verse 10. Verse 10 says, "Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime." That was the moment he decided to be brave, because he knew that there was danger in continuing what he believed in. That was the whole reason that they set this up. They knew he prays to his God every single day. And if we write a law that says you're not allowed to petition any other God apart from the king for a 30-day trial, then you'll be put to death. And they knew that Daniel had this testimony. And that was his testimony, that he decided to be brave. He said, I know that if I continue to do this, I will be put to death. But I trust that my God will deliver me, whatever happens. And to me, that is the bravest example out of all of these, and probably the one that's most pertinent to us, is that if it looks like that what you do that is right in the Lord's eyes is going to come under scrutiny and is going to cause problems in your life, that you throw open your windows and you pray as you do all the time, and you don't hide it, because you know that God will protect you, whatever the outcome. He persevered through oppression and saw an opportunity for God to continue to bless what he knew was right. We'll go to the fifth and most final and best example. This is in Luke 22. Jesus showed the ultimate example of bravery, which we looked at it on Friday. James went through this example, and I was going to pick on some of the other ones in the other Gospels, but I like this one too. It's really good. And in Luke 22, so I'm not going to jump back and forward with this one. We know that he suffered extreme persecution, incredible pain and torture and agony through his trial and his crucifixion that led to his death. Now, I don't know what level of bravery you need to willingly face that, to just continue steadfastly through it, not say a word, not cry, not beg in the face of your accusers. As a lamb against the slaughter, he just held his peace and he said what he needed to say at each moment, and he fulfilled it right up until the end. But in Luke 22, verse 42, he's in the garden praying, and as we read on Friday night, saying, "Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done." And there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was, as it were, great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose up from prayer, sorry, I wanted to finish at the end of the other verse. He did this 3 times. He went and appealed to his father and said, "If there's another way, can we please do it that way? However, if there isn't, I will do according to your will." And this is the moment when he decided to be brave. He knew it was coming for all his life, presumably, but as it culminated at this point, he went, "This is the last time I can ask. But if it's not going to be able to be achieved another way, I will take this on." And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. We'll jump back to Psalm 27 just to close off where we started. Bravery is required when we go through challenges, when we go through trials or circumstance comes upon us, or there's a particular scenario that's coming up that we are worried about. But when we make the decision to be brave before that moment, that's when we allow God to be in control. Things are going to happen that will occur, and we just have to decide to be brave then. But there's many, many things that can happen in our lives where we can make, like all these other people, we can make a decision beforehand to say, I'm going to be brave and trust in God. And if you want to look at each of those, I grabbed those 4 examples because, going right back to the start, Rahab, she decided to be brave and trust in God to achieve the hope of her salvation. We had David, who decided to be brave and trust that God would be the one who would go before him and win the victory. And, we had, who was next? Esther. We had Esther, who decided to be brave to allow herself to be involved in the opportunity regardless of the outcome, and know that God was going to help that unfold in the way that it needed to be. And with Daniel, he decided to be brave to continue to do what was right in the face of opposition. Now, wherever you can see yourself in those scenarios, we can all tie them to that one thing. You say, I'm going to decide to let the Lord be the one that's in control. I'm going to decide to be the Lord. I'm going to decide to let the Lord be the one that determines the outcome and put my faith and trust in him. Psalm 27 verse 1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Who am I going to be afraid of if he's the one that's going to save me and if he's going to be the one that guides my life? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? If he's the one that's going to give us the strength, the courage, the faith that we need to continue, regardless of what comes against us, what are we going to be afraid of? Tying this back into what James was talking about on Friday, of being ready, we can ready ourselves to be fearless by putting it all to the Lord. Whatever's coming up in our life, whatever turns up, that we can be brave in making the decision to put it to God, and he will lift you up in strength, courage, and confidence. And we can say that the Lord has got this with all that comes in our future. And I'll leave it there.